We made it. Week 1 is finally here of the 2021 NFL season. We got Bucks Cowboys coming up tonight, but a full slate coming your way on Sunday with 13 games to choose from. There's a lot to dissect, a lot to break down, but what we're here today to do is to let you know our favorite plays each position, let you know the games looking to stack, injuries to track, and all of that to get you set to win some money on a Sunday. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here, as always, by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor for numberFire.com. Brandon, week 1. It is here, season 4 or 5 or whatever of the Heat Check. How you doing today?
I'm good. I think it's maybe season 5.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Every year with you is a joy. So it feels like no time has passed, Brandon, of course.
Yes, because we're just great friends on and off the show.
Now, I've never fought with you on air about Todd Gurley versus Wayne Gallman. That's never happened. You know, it's all good.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it's really cliche to say, oh, it's finally here. We're so excited to put all this into practice. But I've become a little bit, I don't know if jaded is the right word, but I'm just glad that I don't have to do any more season-long analysis.
Yeah.
No more season-long drafts. I had one each the past 2 nights. I'm just glad I don't have to think about season-long sleepers and breakouts. It's I want to talk about the upcoming slate, break it down 1 week. We're right or we're wrong. And that's why I've just come to love DFS.
Exactly. That's what we're here to talk about for today. If you are a first-time listener, this is our weekly NFL preview podcast. We have these every Thursday. They're at 10 a.m. on the FanDuel YouTube page. If you want to, for some reason, see our faces, masochistic, but all right, do your thing. We are there at 10 a.m. on Thursday. We also have a recap podcast every Monday at 9 a.m. That's also on the FanDuel YouTube page. They go up on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed after that. To get that, search for the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe, and if you like what you hear, or if you win some cash, leave us a rating and review as well. Our rundown for today, we're going to do a slate overview quick. We'll talk about some injuries that have occurred recently. We're going to leave aside the ones that occurred earlier on this preseason, because you probably know about Travis Etienne and stuff like that. So we'll leave those ones aside, but there were some impactful injuries on Wednesday. We'll go through bookmaker info, mostly talking game stacks and stuff like that. We'll talk about trends. The trends discussion for today will be pretty heavily process-based, because we know a lot of you probably haven't played NFL DFS before. Maybe this is your first time around. So first of all, welcome. We're going to talk about our process individually, because Brandon and I do tend to align pretty well in terms of process, but we'll let you know why we do the things we do, specifically when it comes to game stacking, when it comes to running backs and stuff like that. We're going to talk about some weather, and then finally close up with a position-by-position breakdown of our favorite plays on the slate. But let's start things off here by talking about this slate overall. And I think, Brandon, it's probably best to zoom out and talk about week 1 in general, because week 1 is a bit of a unique beast. So what is the key thing for you this week entering your lineup building process that's weighing on your mind?
I think the main thing for week 1 is that there shouldn't really be as much consensus, but there feels like there is consensus. And, step 1 of probably everyone's research stems from bookmaker odds and over-unders, implied team totals, and looking there. I'll talk more about that and how accurate week 1 is compared to other weeks. But I really think that this is the week where you can justify your view a little bit better. So I'm going to say, look at these games in detail and look at the ones where you say this total is high and I don't think it should be this high, or potentially this total is low because the offensive expectations for these two teams aren't super high, or the defense is rated out well last year. And I actually think that's a mistake. You're going to be able to do that more easily in week 1 than you will be in other weeks. By week 4, we're going to know who's getting targeted, barring injuries. We know where the ball is going, who's playing running back snaps. We don't really know that in week 1. So I think this is the week to take your stance and maybe cross off some games that other people love, or circle some games that other people are crossing off.
Yeah, I think that admitting that the consensus can be wrong is a good thing here. And allowing yourself to be different. And I think the tough part with that in terms of NFL is FOMO, the fear of missing out on a big game, because like a lot of the guys who are popular for a reason. They could have a big game. You have to be okay missing out at times. Because I think that there are some guys who, although they're in good situations, they may not be in great situations. And we'll talk a lot about game environment throughout today. That's a broad term we use to decide, like, is it a fantasy-friendly scoring environment? Like, do we expect a lot of plays? Do we expect a lot of points? I think that, to me, if I'm trying to find a place to be different, prioritizing good game environments over questionable ones is a key. And that's going to lead me to potentially being lower than consensus on a couple of popular plays this week. I just checked out FanShare Sports to see who's getting buzz, and I will be lower on several guys near the top of the board. So I think finding ways to be different on a slate where we're going to be wrong a pretty decent number of times is a key for this week. Let's talk about some injuries, specifically looking at the Wednesday injury reports that came out. AJ Brown did not practice on Wednesday. Apparently it was just for rest, but Brandon, it does make me a little bit uneasy that a guy is not practicing week one on Wednesday. I know AJ Brown last year did miss a lot of practice as like a maintenance type thing. It at least it got my attention. I'm still good with that game and with him. Any concerns for you around Brown based on the info we have right now?
I mean, it's one of those where AJ Brown is an amazing receiver, but at times last year, he was injured, and really through the first 8 games, Corey Davis was as involved, if not a little bit more involved, as AJ Brown. And now they have Julio Jones, and Julio Jones, I love Julio Jones, but probably just going to get more and more banged up throughout the season. So you want to talk about somebody who's probably not going to practice a lot. I would have, if AJ Brown was a full go, easily preferred AJ Brown to Julio, but I think this just puts Julio a little bit more on my radar. I think his salary is $7,000 on FanDuel, but if AJ Brown's a full go, I'm going to go there. I like this game. We both like this game a lot, so I'm not going to scare myself off of AJ Brown until we find out that he's really not practicing the rest of the week.
Yeah, if he's full in practice like today on Thursday, sick. Wheels up, baby. He's in a loaded tier at wide receiver for this week. The high salaried wide receivers are stupid good.
And for anyone who's just joining us or anyone who's forgotten, in this house, we pay up at running back.
Correct. However,
this week, a little bit different with the value we have at running back and the elite receivers we got on the slate.
Yeah, it's a fun slate for receiver, and I am more than happy to indulge this week. Austin Eckler did not practice Wednesday. He's got a hamstring injury. I didn't know about this before Wednesday, personally. I don't know if you did, but it was a hamstring that kept Eckler on the sidelines for a long stretch of last year. So the fact that it's a hamstring is a little concerning. Assuming Eckler plays, does this weigh on your mind? It's a pretty tight game between Washington and the Chargers. Would you take swipes at Eckler? Would you take swipes at Justin Jackson if Eckler can't go? How are you viewing the situation based on what we know right now?
I don't particularly love this game anyway. I'm probably not alone in that just because the total is pretty low. But this will probably be the last time I mention my season-long teams. But I was drafting last night, and I was the 105 in a 12-teamer, and Eckler was still there in the second round, and I just was like, this is incredible value.
Yeah.
But I passed on him just because I didn't want to bog down a team with that. But I think that it probably tells me enough that I'm worried that even if he's listed as a full go, he might not really be a full go for week one. They might try to limit him. So I'm probably out on Eckler either way.
I think that we were talking about, if we look at Austin Eckler relative to his salary, he's undersalaried. I think that's fine to say. He is $7,000 or $6,900.
Nice.
Nice. But I think that if you look at his role, his projected role in that offense, that's undersalaried. But the game environment, despite it being a pretty high-paced game on both sides, I think that it's going to be pretty defensive heavy. So, if we can, I was talking before about how there might be some guys who I'm lower on the consensus as a result of game environment. I could see Eckler being that guy. Similar discussion for Washington. Curtis Samuel, actually, before we do that, would you use Justin Jackson if Eckler can't go? Because I probably wouldn't. I think it'd be more of a committee type thing. As much as I love my boy Justin Jackson, I feel like I would be worried that he'd be splitting like impactful touches with others.
Yeah, I think I'd probably be out. We have a lot of value at running back or enough to get us going. So I'm probably not going to chase that. And again, that kind of just goes back to Eckler. If he does play, there's no reason to give him like a 90% snap rate if he's already dealing with a hamstring injury. So yeah.
Okay, same game here. Curtis Samuel dealing with a groin injury all offseason. Seems like he may have re-injured it in practice on Wednesday. So I'm guessing he probably doesn't go. That would boost the target appeal for Terry McLaurin and Logan Thomas, but again, not the world's best game environment, facing a Brandon Staley defense that has a lot of good individual players who are healthy for the first time in a long time. So what's your view on McLaurin and Thomas here under the assumption that we don't see Curtis Samuel make his debut this week?
So I mean, Logan Thomas ran a ton of routes last year at tight end. Terry McLaurin, I've really been a fan of his for, a long time. I was a little bit of an early adopter, but I was also late on him a little bit. I just kind of changed my tune right away when I saw what he was doing. So I'm usually pretty high on Terry McLaurin. But I think we got 13 games on the main slate. I don't really want to go with one-offs in games that project poorly. If I'm playing Terry McLaurin, or Logan Thomas is a little bit easier to justify because tight end is really bad outside the top three. Or at least really volatile outside the top three. If I'm game stacking this game, I would play Terry McLaurin plenty, but I don't think I'm going to get there. So I don't really want to bog down lineups with guys, like one-off plays in these games that I'm really not into.
I think that's where I'm at as well, partly because there are guys around McLaurin in games I do want to stack. We got Julio Jones right there. Tyler Lockett is there. I think that's a fun game, kind of sneakily. Mm-hmm. DJ Moore's game is more attractive. I know that it's not the best offenses, but I think that game is more enticing. With Odell Beckham, who I love this week. I'm not sure your thoughts. I like him a lot at $6,500. So we've got good options around there in games I want to stack. Logan Thomas, like you said, tight end is a bit less process oriented in terms of strictly being game stacks for me. Wide receiver, I kind of need them tied to someone else in their game for the most part, or at least to like someone else in their game. Tight end is less so. So I think that Thomas is easier to justify for me.
Yeah, if you're not playing Travis Kelce, George Kittle, or depending on how you feel, Kyle Pitts, you're basically just hoping for a touchdown in maybe 50 yards or something. So any tight ends are very different, but I think I just wanted to reiterate where I would be much more willing to play Logan Thomas than Terry McLaurin.
I think that's where I'm at as well. Finally, Saquon Barkley was limited in practice on Wednesday. Kenny Golladay was limited. Evan Engram missed practice. Super low total game. Any interest for you in Saquon in the comeback season or any of the other Giants here? Or does this just boost the Broncos defense with Golladay and Engram being banged up?
Probably boost the Broncos defense more than anything. Their whole kind of skill position unit has been kind of not really healthy.
Kenny Golladay said flat out they might be slow to start.
Yeah,
that's not a good sign.
No, it's not. So Saquon Barkley, we could look back and be like, oh, he was the unpopular gem who just broke out and had 25 FanDuel points, but the odds of that are pretty low in this game environment. So I think I'm out.
Yeah, I have projected aggregate offensive efficiency for each game. This is the worst in the main slate by a pretty wide margin. So that's tough for a good game environment, and I'm okay being lower on that one as a result. We did switch things up this year in terms of the rundown, the order in which we go. Last year, we would do the trends first, talking about things that are standing out, role changes and stuff like that. This year, we're going to do bookmaker info first. And the reason we're doing that is because our process revolves so heavily around finding good games, and a lot of that stems from bookmaker info. So we're going to start things off with the bookmaker info and talk about three games that are pretty interesting, starting off with the highest total on the slate. That is the Browns and the Chiefs up to 54.5. It opened at 53, went down to 52.5, shot up to 54.5. So that is 2 points higher than every other game on the slate. Also interesting, because we want to stack high scoring tight games, is the Browns are suddenly only 5.5 point dogs. Do I agree with that? Not necessarily. Do I find it interesting? I do. So Brandon, are you as high on this game as bookmakers, and is it the top game stack on the slate for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm about as high as they would be, but I don't think that's the top game stack. That's the game we'll talk about next. But one thing that can get lost in the shuffle with trying to break down 13 games and look at all these different individual matchups is there are certain teams that are just really good for daily fantasy, and the Chiefs are one of them. Not necessarily just because they're an amazing offense, but because you look at a game where the Chiefs are playing and you say, if I like them, I'm going to play Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, and Travis Kelce. And that's basically it, unless we learn something different. But those guys account for so much of their offense. You could sell me on Edwards-Helaire for this week, but that's basically what you're looking at. And so from that perspective, I think there's a ton of appeal for the Chiefs, which again, like the easiest thing you could ever say. But don't lose sight of how, like, if this team goes off, it's going to go through those three guys.
Yeah. I would say that, like, because Mecole Hardman's salary is so low, like in game stacks, he makes a lot of sense because we've seen him run a decent number of routes in the preseason with the first team. He's not been like a fully great role, and he was limited in practice with an oblique injury on Wednesday, but like I'd expect a role expansion from where he was last year, and to him not to be like just a guy who we use when Tyreek Hill is out. He could have standalone type value as well. So I think the Hardman works for game stacks, but like you said, you know where the ball is going, and it's going there a lot. So I think that's tremendous as far as that. And the other thing too that I think boosts the appeal in the Chiefs is that I've got salary to burn this week because I don't need to jam in 3 different running backs at $8,500 or higher. I can go with one of those studs and then get 2 guys in the CEH range, at $6,800 on down. I can do pretty easily for this week specifically. So I think that is very enticing for me. As far as running it back with the Browns, like I think if I'm ranking out the guys on this team, it's Odell first by a wide margin for me. Nick Chubb is $7,700, and that's a lot for a dude who does not catch passes in a game where they're 5.5-point dogs. A little tougher there. Austin Hooper, I do like the salary on him. He is down at $5,100. So I feel like that's the one downside here is the bring back options. It's a bit of a narrower group to me, which could be good, I guess, because you can concentrate your exposure. That is one thing that stands out as a slight concern for me.
Yeah, I mean, you want it to be narrow, and something I'll talk about in trends is the wide receiver threes in game stacks can really feel like, oh, this, like, you want to get access to this guy. The odds that they put up huge games are still really low, even if you count for salary. And I think you and I are both on the same page now at this point in our process where we don't really look at floor. We don't really want a wide receiver in the 5,000 range to put up 10 points and think that that's like enough, because you're going to miss elsewhere unless you just have like
you want guys who can erase your mistakes.
Yes. So you want fewer options. So for me, it's going to be OBJ, number one, like you said. Now Kareem Hunt, and it's revenge game for him. And Nick Chubb, like they kind of had a bit of a role reversal late, like down the stretch. And you could look at Nick Chubb getting more targets, but he really didn't change a whole lot with his route rate. So I think that's probably a little bit misleading. And Kareem Hunt was actually really involved in the red zone down the stretch. So like it's kind of a complicated situation. And usually for us, I think we're just typically out on this backfield because if you have 2 running backs, you don't really have one running back that we want to target in really any game script. So yeah, I'm probably looking at Odell Beckham and not a whole lot else from the Browns, which is why I would rank this not my favorite game stack.
I agree. I would also say the one positive for Chubb is that he is more viable than other running backs in game stacks because if he pays off, it's because of a long run, which doesn't burn clock. Like for some other guys, like they may depend on like these like a lot of volume. Nick Chubb can pay off like real fast. So like I think that he will be someone I use more limited in game stacks. I will not have him as a standalone play. I think that's where I'm at.
I don't know if I'm using this. There's a lot I don't know if I'm ever using right, but I don't know if that's a galaxy brain thing where like if Nick Chubb like has a good rushing game, they're not burning clock because it's a long rush. So like,
I mean, I only do that for like Chubb and Henry. Like those are the only two guys to me who are like capable of like being like, oh, okay, here's a 70-yarder, sick. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I was hoping we wait a little bit longer to talk about Derrick Henry, but
no, he's awesome this week. So let's talk about him right now and talk about the best game stack of the week. That is the Cardinals versus the Titans. Total there 52.5, and there has been some recent money on the under, and it is lower in other books. This total is, but the John Sheeran and the people at FanDuel Sportsbook keeping this one steady, 52.5. The spread is 3 points, pretty even money on both sides here. I love this game. I think it is my favorite game stack of the week. No real concerns for me there. Are you also ranking this number one?
I am.
Sick.
Yeah, I just think that it's the easiest game to stack. And it's just about as likely to kind of erupt as the game we just talked about. You also pretty much know where the ball's going for teams as well. And that's, again, a key part of game stacking is there are certain games where it's like, it could be any one of these 4 receivers, including a tight end or something. We don't really get that here. It's going to be DeAndre Hopkins if we're looking at wide receiver for the Cardinals, and obviously Kyler Murray with his rushing ability just has such a high floor and high ceiling. And then you kind of just throw it back with the other side with AJ Brown if he's healthy, Julio, Tannehill, and Derrick Henry. So like, this isn't going to erupt if because Anthony Ferkser goes for 3 touchdowns. I don't think it's probably not going to work that way, but maybe it will. I don't know.
Ferkser's role in the preseason really bothered me, so I'm not going to be going there personally. But I think that this game, like, I think it's very possible my 2 favorite quarterbacks in this later in this game. Should I probably put Mahomes above Tannehill? Yes. Am I going to? Not sure yet. I think Tannehill's pretty sick. So I think that to me, Kyler Murray is the best play on this slate. Like if I am rolling out a single entry lineup, Kyler Murray is the first person I put in it. I think that he is just such a good option because like I do a research study each year looking at where the public invests and which players tend to make perfect lineups. The public heavily underinvests in quarterbacks who are slight underdogs because they don't have the highest implied totals, stuff like that. And Kyler has that. He's in a great game environment. He is facing a defense I don't fear too much. I know they've added some guys, but like, how much of an upgrade were they truly? So I think that Kyler Murray is the number 1 quarterback of this week. I think that Ryan Tannehill, at least in contention for 2, he and Mahomes right in there. And with Murray, I know I can stack him with DeAndre Hopkins. I think that Chase Edmonds is a viable lower salaried play for this week under the hopes that he gets like an Austin Eckler type role from last year where the yardage itself can make him pay off. And he just needs to, if he can get a score from like 7 yards out, we could be in the money. But I think that that's why I'm so into this game. Again, Kyler, number 1 for me among all quarterbacks this week. I would say among bring back options, I would go with AJ Brown 1, followed by Derrick Henry, followed by Julio. How would you rank the Titans in terms of bring back options if you're going Kyler at quarterback?
So that would probably depend a lot on just popularity, honestly. I think because there are plenty of receivers who can match AJ Brown and Julio Jones from an upside standpoint, but very few who can do it for Derrick Henry. I would probably put Henry first, and then build around receivers from other games. I think it's a little bit easier, but I would probably go Henry, Julio, AJ Brown.
Yeah, I think that's fair too. I think they're all 3 very similar.
$800 in salary for a receiver goes a long way this week.
You're right.
Even though we do have value at running back and quarterback, if you want to go that way, but I think you and I we're pretty set on kind of paying up at the position at this point to get access to that upside. So
yeah,
I think Julio has a little bit more of a little bit more appeal for me this week.
And Julio's been healthy recently. He was banged up a bit at the beginning of camp, but like it seems like he's had enough time to get ramped up and where we can feel comfortable with him. This rapport with Tannehill, the reason that I'm a bit lower is because I think that it does take a bit of time to develop that like key chemistry between a quarterback and a wide receiver. So that's why I have Julio lower, but I'm not. I think they're all 3 in the same tier in terms of stacking for this game?
They're just going to go play some pitch and catch, Jim. Don't overcomplicate it.
Sure, bud. We got one neutral site game this week. That is in Jacksonville, where the Saints are playing the Packers. That line shifted to Green Bay -4 at the venue shift. It's now 3.5. Total here down to 49.5. Down a smidge from 50.5 when it opened. I think that we've seen some moving on the under. We had Dr. Eric Eager on our Covering the Spread betting podcast yesterday. He said he liked the under for that game before it went down to 49.5. So I see more paths to an under here than I see paths to an under for Cardinals, Titans, or for Chiefs, Browns. But we have some interesting guys here. We got Alvin Kamara with no Michael Thomas, with no Latavius Murray. We got Marquez Callaway, got the Packers guys. Are you looking to stack this game, or are you in the same camp as me where there are some slight concerns tugging at you here?
This one didn't rate out as well for me as the two games we just talked about. It's a really big risk to take a wait and see approach when it comes to daily fantasy, and you can really gain an edge by, making those assumptions that we talked about at the top of the show. But I think a lot of people are assuming that Marquez Callaway, myself included, is going to be very involved. So he's probably going to be very popular. We don't know what the offense will really look like when Jameis Winston gets out there in week one game time. And honestly, I mean, would we be surprised if like Taysom Hill still like steals high leverage snaps from Jameis? So like I
would be surprised if he didn't.
Right. So like I'm not probably going to be in on Jameis much at all this year unless I see something that just like really changes my tune right now. But I mean, I think this is more of a mini stack game for me because I'm probably not going to get to either quarterback. So I'd be looking at Alvin Kamara for sure, Marquez Callaway, and then historically I've been low on Aaron Jones, but without Jamal Williams and adding in AJ Dillon there, that kind of solidifies Aaron Jones from a receiving role, which is very, 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 very important. Even on FanDuel, which is a half PPR site, targets matter a lot for running backs. So I think that I'm going to be higher on Aaron Jones than I really ever have been before.
Where do you rank Kamara among the higher salary backs? You don't have to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because that's on the spot. But do you put him above Henry, Cook, McCaffrey? Where are you viewing him in the context of those guys for this week?
I think he might be number 1 at his salary.
Okay.
McCaffrey, obviously, I don't want to forget how good Christian McCaffrey is whenever he's healthy. We saw that last year, but I think at salary, Kamara just feels like the best option.
The one counterpoint I have to Kamara is I don't like this game environment as much as the Titans and the Cardinals. And I also, I might be stupid for this. I don't like it as much as Bengals Vikings.
I like
that's why
too.
I might put Kamara second behind Dalvin. Yeah, 800 is a lot. You're right. You're fully right. Yeah. But I just like that game environment more. I think Dalvin is also equally disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I go Dalvin over Alvin, which is tough to say. But I put Alvin above Henry. So to me, I think that upper tier is Dalvin 1, Alvin 2, Henry 3, McCaffrey 4, just because the salary is there's a gap there.
Yeah, that's really hard to get to. Even with the value, you're going to have to take a value quarterback. And, if you're coming along from season long, maybe this is the first DFS show you've really listened to, you can match some high end upside or a replaceability with value quarterbacks, streaming quarterbacks, in that sense. But the true 30+ point games that you really need to kind of score really well in tournaments, those come from guys with rushing ability or the ability to throw for 5 touchdowns randomly in a game. So, it's really hard to get to McCaffrey. And I think honestly, years ago we would just lock in Christian McCaffrey and figure it out from there. But with the quarterback landscape right now, I think that's actually gonna be harder to do if McCaffrey's healthy all year.
Yeah. I will say that you can build a lineup with McCaffrey. And I have a Kyler and Nuke stack in here. It does force you to spend on a tight end, which I'm okay with for this week. There are some guys who have good roles down there. I would like to get to Kittle personally and Kelsey and stuff like that. But I'm okay So I think that what I will get to McCaffrey. I will have him in my lineups, but I think the broader takeaway is I want at least one of those four. And I say at least, meaning I'm okay with two. I want at least one of those top four guys in every single lineup this week. Is that a fair thing for you to say as well?
Yeah, I think that top four is such a tier above. And again, similar to quarterback, like only a few running backs can really break open a slate. And it's going to be one of these four, or maybe like a Nick Chubb if he scores 3 times from the 1 yard line. But we're not going to be astonished if one of these four is a must have. So I'm with you. Clear top four. I'm higher on Alvin Kamara than you are. But
Slightly.
But like, it's all pretty tight up there.
Are we talking Bengals Vikings at all?
I don't think specifically.
We have some positional plays there, but I think just briefly before we move on to the trends discussion, I had this game number 3 for stacking right now. Bengals Vikings. I think if I look at my projected offensive efficiency, that's the 3rd best game on the slate. And I'm okay trusting that given the Bengals, when Joe Burrow's healthy, tend to be pretty passive. You know, the Vikings will probably be slower this year than they were last year if their defense is a little bit more steady, and they're probably going to try to run the ball. But I still think that's number 3 for me. Is it the same for you?
No, I would have
Eagles Falcons
above this game, primarily because for the Bengals, I'm probably not going to play Joe Burrow.
I'm not going to play either quarterback in that game, but I like Dalvin T stacks. I like Jefferson T stacks, like Jefferson Mixon, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think we're really huge on T Higgins, but I don't know how Jamar Chase is going to. I know he's had his issues in the preseason, but I don't know how that target share is going to shake out. And again, this is one of those I can wait and see, or I can make an assumption. I should probably just make an assumption on T Higgins, who I love anyway. But that for that reason, I think I'm a little bit lower. And for the Eagles Falcons, I mean, that's hard to stack too, but it would be basically Jalen Hurts and then like Calvin Ridley. So
yeah, you can find logical ways to get to that one. So let's move now to our trends discussion. Again, we're going to keep this pretty process based. We will have some applications of it in the discussion afterwards. But Brandon, you mentioned at the top that we can be wrong, especially in week number 1. And so you dug into this, looking at betting markets for week 1, how they perform relative to other weeks. What did you find when you looked into that data?
Yeah, I mean, like, so it would be like really silly if like in week 11 I was like, hey, what's the hit rate of like week 11 spreads and over unders compared to other weeks? Like, it feels really random, although week 11 actually is kind of an outlier because it's typically where the Thanksgiving games fall. But week 1 is definitely its own sort of beast in a sense. We just know less about teams, and that includes those, people setting the lines. So I pulled historical over-unders, spreads, implied totals, and a few other like high-level team stats, things like points scored across all games since 2000, bucketed them by regular season week 1 through 16. And here are a few things that I found that I think might be notable. The average week 1 spread is 2.1 points, which is the 5th tightest across the sample. I think that probably indicates, if I can read into it properly, that there's just uncertainty of, which teams are truly good. You'll probably see we're not seeing huge spreads, even though there probably should be some bigger spreads on the slate, overall week 1 too, not just this slate. But so I think that things are a little bit tighter than we would typically see otherwise. The average week 1 over under is lower than any other week as well, 42.8 points. I know over unders climbing historically, but this all is, at least baked in relative to, year to year. And the average point total for week 1 games was just 42.6. So it actually underperformed the lowest, over unders that we typically see. So that was the second lowest average point total points that we see in a game. So basically scoring expectations are low and scoring itself is actually low. In week 1. Week 1 has also historically been one of the few weeks where home teams fall shy of their implied team totals. And again, if you're new to DFS or implementing, bookmaker stuff, implied team total is just an over under minus spread and then divide that by 2. But away teams do outperform that by about 0.2 points on average. That's about middling, but that implies that home teams typically overvalued in week 1 long term. Again, overs have hit at the 5th lowest rate among all weeks from weeks 1 through 16. So again, all of this is basically saying scoring can be low, and home teams are typically a little bit overinflated so far. And then the only other week where a game is less likely to score at least 55 total points is week 11. Again, that's probably the Thanksgiving angle. So we just don't really see a whole lot of eruptions. Teams that score at least 30 points, that rate's down from your overall average. So basically all of that, I know it's a lot of information to process, but I'm going to sum it up here. So what I'm seeing is week 1 games are usually tighter than we would see otherwise. So I think there's a lot of that uncertainty and just hesitancy to make these spreads as big as they would be even in week 2, once we learn some information about these same teams playing each other. Home teams probably a little bit overvalued, and fewer games most likely should erupt. So I think for me, that means I'm not going to be chasing the implied team totals of home teams as much as I typically would be a little bit more hesitant, a little bit more confident to kind of cross those games off for me. And then also, I kind of want to narrow things down, because if fewer games are going to erupt, I want to make sure that when I do hit, that I have exposure to those games. So it could be kind of an all or nothing week, but that's kind of what I'm seeing. So I just wanted to address it just because we just talked about all this information and how to use it. So and week 1 is a little bit of an outlier. So that's something that I wanted to bring to your attention. I don't know if any of that would affect your strategy at all.
No, I think that it goes in line with what my strategy was, where I think that I want to be pretty narrow this week, which again, we're talking about admitting the fact that you could be wrong. I don't think this is saying I'm right. I think it's saying I want to capitalize if I'm right.
Yes.
And that's what I'm trying to do by having a more narrow player pool for this week. And I think that does back that up, because again, I think when you look at this slate, I can see paths to unders for a lot of games, which does go along with what you were saying, where we want to be narrower. So I think that what it does for me is reinforces that I want to be tight, specifically at quarterback. I want to have, right now, I might have 3 quarterbacks. I can talk myself very easily into a 4th guy, very easily. But I can see a path to an under in that game as well. That's Jalen Hurts. He'd be number 4 for me. So I think, to me, it reinforces I should be tight with my core, specifically at quarterback. I should be okay. There are some games with lower totals that have gotten talked up. Specifically Jets, Panthers, which I get. I think that it's there are reasons to be interested in that game, but I feel like it's a situation where maybe it's getting pumped up due to potential rather than I think people are assuming that game will shoot out, but it still has a 44.5 point total and just went down a point. So I might be lower on that game in general than others as a result of, both just what I think of that game, but also what you're talking about here, where not a lot of games we should expect to just blow up here.
Yeah. And so something else I'll talk about later in the trend section is taking some stands and narrowing things down, because it's very easy to fall into the trap, especially in week 1, where you don't want to start off week 1 with a complete dud of a week. And so you have that, as you mentioned before, the FOMO, that fear of I gotta have some Russ, I gotta have some Josh Allen, I gotta have some exposure to all these guys. It's not really a great strategy. And this week, we're gonna see some of these games probably, if history holds, just fall shy of their totals, and a few games are still going to go off. And so, for example, we've talked about some games at the top, but if you're looking at the Seahawks Colts at the 50.5 over under, and you're like, I think that's too high. You should feel better saying that this week than you would in week 4, whenever things are getting more efficient. These lines are getting more efficient.
Yeah, I think that that's correct. When you were talking to me in the offseason, we were talking about just process in general. You're like, hey, I think I'm going to pare down my player pool at quarterback to be 3 guys per week. I was like, I don't know if I'll I get the thought process. I'm not sure if I'll get there. This week, at least, I'm there. I think that's the right way to play things. Let's move now to my first trend and talk about value running backs, because there are a lot of running backs with lower salaries this week who you can feel good about. Guys who have experienced role changes due to injuries or stuff like that. And we've got undervalued guys. And in general, the public is pretty good at predicting which lower salary backs will perform well for DFS. If you look at hit rates of popular lower salary backs, the public does a very good job of selecting which guys to take. But I think that because we have some options here, we can afford to be selective, make sure we are getting ceiling out of our value plays. Because if you want to have a tournament winning lineup, you need guys who can score a lot of points no matter what their salary may be. Over the past 3 years, 47 running backs have made a perfect FanDuel lineup with a salary of $6,500 or lower. Those guys have averaged 27.2 FanDuel points per game. Again, $6,500 or lower, average 27.2 FanDuel points per game. Not a single player in that time scored less than 17.5 FanDuel points. Only 2 of them scored less than 20 FanDuel points. So 45 out of 47 scored more than 20 FanDuel points. In week 1 specifically, all the guys who were value plays made the perfect lineup scored at least 23 FanDuel points. They averaged 28.6 FanDuel points. So basically, putting this in the most basic terms possible, you need a lot of points, even from your value plays, to hit a perfect lineup. And not every player can hit those kinds of scores. You need to get a lot of points to get 20 points. Let's say here, we are looking at Gus Edwards, not in this slate, so I can pick on him. Let's say we think Gus Edwards is going to pop off and score 20 FanDuel points. For a guy who doesn't catch passes, that is 140 rushing yards and a touchdown, or 80 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. The value plays who made perfect lineups averaged 3.7 receptions for 37.4 yards per game. So you can get big games from guys who don't catch passes, because 8 of the 47 value plays had just 1 catch. 1 of them had none. But those 9 players who had 1 or 0 catches averaged 144 rushing yards and 1.9 rushing touchdowns. You need them to go bananas to make it without passing game volume. So I am good at looking at some value backs this week, but I need them to have a clear path to a 20-point game. Look at that player, ask yourself, can this guy get me 20 FanDuel points? If the answer is no, cross them off your list. I don't care how popular they are. I don't care how great their floor is. It does not matter. Cross them off. And that path is a lot easier to envision if the back catches passes, at least for me. So that's why my process is going to be heavily dependent on passing game backs. If there is a value back who I think will catch passes, get some good work on early downs as well, I will be very okay with them. But they do need to clear those hoops to be viable for me. Brandon, what about you? What is your process when it comes to value running backs?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this already. At least I brought it up. We have kind of just gotten to the point where we don't believe in floor so much, because floor can evaporate very easily, especially in the NFL.
Floor is a dirty word.
Yeah. So you need that upside, and upside comes from production, and production comes from opportunities. And we know that even though, again, FanDuel half PPR site, targets matter for running backs. Even if it was a standard scoring site, you still get points for the yardage that they accumulate. So downplaying targets at a site that isn't full PPR is not a good process to begin with. But last year, I'm getting to your adjusted opportunities, but last year the average running back carry accrued about 0.6 FanDuel points, and it was about 1.1 per target for running backs. So we basically, or Jim specifically, doubles targets compared to carries, calls those adjusted opportunities. I don't know if you changed.
Should probably find a new word for that, because it's hard for me to say it. Adjusted opportunities. It's
weighted.
Very tough.
Well, yeah.
No, I don't want to say opportunities. That's a weird word. I think that's the word that stumbles me. I don't know. I'll figure this out. If you have suggestions, hit me up, because I hate saying that phrase.
Yeah, we'll work on it.
Yeah.
But, you want running backs who get targets, because as Jim just pointed out, you need that for upside, unless you have a super outlier rushing week with all that rushing production. But we also know just that on a per play basis, targets are about twice as fruitful for running backs. So yeah, for me, I'm also really looking at running backs who run routes, get targets, are involved in other ways other than just getting carries. So I'm going to struggle with Gus Edwards, assuming that he has that role. I know he's not on the slate, so we're picking on him now, but that's an issue, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the Nick Chubb thing too. Derrick Henry, we're typically a little bit lower on them sometimes.
Henry, we came around on last year.
Yes. And I said I wouldn't talk about my season long teams anymore, but I ended up picking inside the top 5 in both of
I
my
picked him last
drafts.
night. Yeah. The best ball draft.
I have him in like 3 of my 4 season long
Yeah.
leagues just because, but so I'm a Derrick Henry guy this year, but yeah. So like you have to basically, for me, be a Derrick Henry or Nick Chubb, rushing wise in order for me to like what you can bring to the table from an upside standpoint.
So if we're looking at value backs this week, who can check those boxes? I don't think it's the most likely scenario, but I think there is a scenario where Trey Sermon catches passes for the 49ers. He caught some passes in the first preseason game. He's $5,200. I'm not going to use him much. I am okay having some exposure to Trey Sermon because I think the rushing actual like yardage could be bonkers in that offense behind that line. I'm okay with him. Damian Harris doesn't check the list because he's not going to catch passes. I don't like that game. Don't like that offense as much. So Damian Harris will not be there. James Robinson will catch passes, most likely. He's probably going to lose some work to Carlos Hyde, which is frustrating. That's why I will very likely be underweight on Robinson relative to the field, but I'm okay with him. Chase Edmonds will catch passes. Probably will not get goal line work, but I think that he could pay off despite that as a result of the yardage he gets, the aggregate yardage from receiving and rushing. I will be okay using him. Naji Harris, $6,500, gonna catch passes, gonna get work. He's sick. I don't care about the fact they're 6.5-point dogs. He's sick. Miles Sanders, not a value, quote unquote, back at $6,600, but I think there is a path to him getting things done. Don't mind that game. I think he works. And then also Clyde Edwards-Helaire, we talked about him in passing before. I think that he will get enough passing game work for me to feel good about him. So there are some value packs who I like this week, but I'm trying to keep the list pretty limited. If I lop off Trey Sermon, that will not break my heart. I would not be shocked if that happens, but I wanted to mention that I'm considering him, digging deeper into him, and open to the thought of using him later in the week.
Yeah, I mean, I like pretty much all those guys. I would probably be lowest on Miles Sanders just because of the buzz outside of.
I'm lowest on him with that group as well.
Yeah. And I don't know how I'm going to feel about DeAndre Swift most of the season. I don't know if he was actually going to be healthy, but he got in a full practice on Wednesday. So I'm not going to chase it, but he also would profile as typically in a better matchup, a better situation. Right. So, yeah.
Okay, let's move down to your second trend in a piece that you wrote this offseason for numberFire, looking at quarterbacks, stacking, how we should stack them, and the paths to good games here. And I thought it was a really good piece because you dug into the data and tried to find how we should play things from a process perspective when stacking specifically. So talk us through what you found there and what that means for week one.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that isn't necessarily going to be like a big revelation, but it's also something that I think having data on and really thinking about what this means for our lineups is important. And I'm just trying to set the tone for these week one trends. Next week, we'll talk about like, pace and usage that we see is super relevant, but stacks start at quarterback. I think that's safe to say. A stack is basically quarterback plus a pass catcher. Running back plus defense also would qualify, but that's actually kind of overrated in terms of like hitting big games. And you can read more about that in the piece that I did on numberFire. But there's correlation there. Just the huge games are not super common. But I went back over the past 3 years and studied how frequently positions hit benchmarks that are basically required to be in a not a perfect lineup, but a Sunday million winning lineup. It's about 25 FanDuel points for quarterbacks, 20 for running back, 18 for receiver, 14 for tight end, and 12 for defense. But I'm not really going to talk about defense here. But the effect of hitting on a stack is kind of what I want to go over because it's really hard to like comprehend without data. And it makes sense. Like, yeah, if my quarterback goes off, his receivers are probably going to have a big game, and so I want to stack all the time. But like, there's a little bit more to it than that, even though that's technically correct. So over that sample from 2018 to 2020, there was about a 30% chance that a team's highest projected wide receiver scored 18 FanDuel points. Projections coming from numberFire. When you lock in that the quarterback did cross that 25-point threshold, the odds that receiver crossed his threshold of 18 FanDuel points went up to about 54%. So if you say, yes, the quarterback is going to erupt, the receiver, let's call it double because it's gonna make sense more. So let's go the odds that receiver won, the highest projected receiver, his odds go from about 30% to about 60%, just for simplicity's sake. And that QB1 wide receiver one stack was the strongest of anything between a quarterback and his, any of his other skill position players. It's not surprising. I'm not saying it is, but you were also marginally more likely to see the quarterback's wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 3 hit that 18-point threshold, which is actually it's more impressive for these lower projected guys to get there. The wide receiver 2 did it about 32% of the time when the quarterback hit. That compares to 16% when the quarterback may or may not have hit. So again, roughly double. For the wide receiver 3, the hit rate went from 6.4% to 14.3%. So about, again, roughly double. So the odds that whenever your quarterback has a big game, the odds that the receiver, his pass catchers also have a big game, kind of double. But again, for like a wide receiver 3, and this is something that I would do a lot, is like, I like this quarterback. The wide receiver 1, his salary is too high. I'm going to play his wide receiver 3. He's going to be out there running routes. The odds that guy actually puts up, again, we want that ceiling, not just value. Other people approach it differently, but you and I, we want that ceiling. It's still 14.3% likely to get to that 18-point mark. And yeah, if we lowered it a little bit to 15 for these wide receiver 3s at lower salaries, could still get us there. But like, the odds are not that high for these lower projected players. And so that is a key change for me for this year. And yes, it's intuitive, but it's also telling that like the wide receiver 3 hit rate still really low. And actually, just one more quick thought process. If you take the top 5 projected quarterbacks in all weeks in this sample, according to numberFire, the top 5, so we're looking at most likely the guys with the highest salaries, they hit that threshold at about 37% of the time. So let's call it 40. If you play 5 quarterbacks in a week, you narrow it down to even 5, odds are 2 of them hit and 3 of them don't really get you there. And without those big games from quarterbacks, you're going to have a hard time. So that is the simplest way I can kind of say why I'm trying to pare things down and really maximize whenever my stacks hit. This is not going to be for everybody. If you're playing cash games, you want the best projections. I get that. But for tournaments, I think it's really important to look at these hit rates. And you can read more about this on numberFire. But I'm really changing my approach. I really want to maximize whenever I do hit and not just be all over the place because of FOMO. So that's going to be a big change for me for this year. So my question to you is not, did I convince you to change your opinion on anything, but just what process changes have you kind of had over the off season with your player pool?
I mean, I haven't changed much, but I think that this is something that does it sticks in my mind specifically for the Cardinals Titans game, like basically telling me don't get too cute. Like I can see Rondale Moore being a viable play for this week.
Yeah.
But also it's DeAndre freaking Hopkins. I have my issues with Hopkins. I don't know if I have any season-long shares of him. I have concerns given that he's a little bit older, just some weird stuff going on, some weird tweets. So that's a thing. But I don't want to overthink it. And I think that that's kind of the takeaway for me is if I can get a 60% hit rate from the highest projected wide receiver on the team, assuming that quarterback goes off, which is what I'm doing when I put that player in my lineup. I am making that assumption.
Yes.
I am okay using that as like a guideline of how I make out my combinations. Because I'm a heavily combination-based person when it comes to multi-entering for tournaments where I want to go Kyler, Hopkins, Julio, Kyler, Hopkins, AJ Brown, Kyler, Hopkins, Henry. It can be a guiding light of, for 60% of my Kyler stacks, put in Hopkins. And I think that number is higher than I would have expected. Mm-hmm. Therefore, I want to use that as like the guiding baseline number and be more aggressive with stacking the quarterback with their top option as opposed to differentiating going elsewhere. So I know you didn't ask if you convinced me, but like you kind of did. Like it did help, I think.
Yeah, like I mean, if we find out that Rondale Moore is just going to be like the wide receiver 2, that hit rate's still quite strong.
Sure,
around 30. But if we're looking at, I don't want to say the Bengals, but they're a good example. Let's say the salaries are a little bit different. Like, and you like that game, you like Joe Burrow, for example. Tyler Boyd's got his touchdown issues, but like historically, I would be like, well, I'll just play the one of the lower salary guys because I can't pay up for the top receiver. I'm going to be making those changes this year. So just because of the data that I came across.
I will be too. And I think it's impactful specifically for this week with the games that I want to stack. And I think that's good info to have. My second trend is talking about totals because bookmakers are good at what they do. They have to be to make money. So, it's a high stakes thing. And we should take signals from what they say when filling out lineups. For this week specifically, the most relevant info will be totals because, as Brandon mentioned, spreads are a lot smaller in week one than other weeks. So totals matter a bit more, and totals play a key role in deciding which players wind up having a ceiling. And anecdotally, this makes sense because the more points scored, the more touchdown chances for both sides, and we need touchdowns for huge DFS days. So that's very obvious, and the data backs that up. Last year, there were 136 non-defensive players in perfect lineups. The average total from those games was 49.996, basically 50, whereas the average total league-wide was 48.1, almost a 2-point gap there. So higher scoring games are better. That's obvious. I'm not going to belabor that point. But I think the bigger takeaway is how bad the lower total games were. Only one player made a perfect lineup last year with a game total lower than 41. Only 17 out of 136 had a total lower than 45. That's 12.5% of players in perfect lineups came from games with a total lower than 45. The number of games league-wide with a total that low was 24.5. So almost double what wound up being in perfect lineups. This is especially key at quarterback. Of the 17 perfect quarterbacks last year, only one came from a game with a total lower than 48. And again, 48.1 was the average total last year. Only one quarterback came from a game with a total lower than that. Despite that, more than 21% of all popular quarterbacks in the FanDuel Sunday Million came from games with a total of 48 or lower. So the public invested pretty heavily in low total games, despite the fact we know intuitively low total games are not good. And it was big at wide receiver too. So basically, we very rarely see big FanDuel totals out of players in games with a low total. And the public, I don't think, goes far enough, as they should, in crossing those lower total gains off. So if you want to use a player, I would say regardless of position, maybe tight end could be an exception. In a game with a low total, you had better be getting them at a massive discount or expecting that game to go over that total. And if not, you're going to come up short pretty often. So for this week, that's going to lower me on some of the 49ers guys. I talked about Trey Sermon with low salary. James Robinson and the Jags, I think that hurts their outlook. Broncos, Giants, Dolphins, Patriots. I am very wary of the Chargers-Washington game. That's the concern. And I will say, Sam Darnold is near the top of fan share tags right now at quarterback. He's not going to be my player pool for several reasons, but also I think that this total consideration is a big part of that. So Brandon, what is your thought process when it comes to totals? Am I dumb in being kind of wary of this Jets-Panthers game, but just overall thought process here?
So I think I had three things I wanted to say. First is I added a column to my spreadsheet to search for quarterbacks with totals of at least 48 so that I could just filter out some guys who don't meet that criteria. Second, with Darnold specifically is a really good example of, I like Sam Darnold for 2021. I think that it's going to be his best season for a lot of reasons. I'm really high on DJ Moore. He's got Christian McCaffrey to go along with Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore. So I'm high on that, but he's the kind of quarterback who he's not going to get a whole lot of rushing. And he's one of those quarterbacks where it's like, yeah, I'm going to have some sprinkles of Sam Darnold in case he, has a big game. That's probably bad process from huge multi-entry. And I'm, yes, if you look back at like Sunday Million winning lineups, there's going to be some times where guys like just overperform drastically, but those are the types of plays I'm trying to cut out a little bit, take more stances. And three, I'm correct in that these are pre-game over-unders, right? These aren't like point
pre-game over-unders, pre-game expectations.
So this isn't even actual points combined, which is harder to trust because obviously we don't have that information. So this is just like what we know going in. These guys don't really hit. And the fourth thing that I just remembered is that these are perfect lineups, and perfect lineup analysis, which we've both done plenty of, we know is kind of, it can be a little bit, I don't want to say disingenuous, but like we know that this is just cherry picking the best performances And you would think that the players in these low totaled games have lower salaries. And the very fact that there haven't even been like cherry picked outlier games from these low totals that, ostensibly coming from these lower salaries, those guys aren't even getting into the perfect lineup. So that's really telling. And I think that this is something that should really drive us. And yes, it's going to lead us to be a bit chalky. But honestly, quarterback draft percentages are never as high as they really should be. I think it's typically really dispersed if you go back and look at things. So, I think you can still have leverage, like high leverage lineups, if you just focus on these games with the higher totals. So again,
like Darnold's probably gonna be more popular than Kyler Murray. Based on the early fan share tags, I think that's going to happen, and I think it's absurd.
Yes, that's the kind of thing that probably years ago too that we would have been like at least I would have been like, oh, I like Sam Darnold, but
I would have too.
I think we're just learning more and more and more, and
ceiling is everything.
Yeah.
I use Alex Smith in DFS, so I'm just as guilty of this as others. Yes. But we need to evolve. So going along with the Darnold rushing point, there were 4 quarterbacks last year in perfect lineups who scored less than 2.5 points via rushing. So less than 25 yards, no touchdown. Those guys had 315 yards and 5 touchdowns, 377 and 3. That was on a pretty low scoring week in week 16. 502 yards and 4 touchdowns, and 416 and 5. If you think that Sam Darnold can go for 416 and 5, eat your heart out. Go ahead. Right. I just don't think he can. And that's why I will be lower on that game in general as a result of this. And it's when Sam Darnold throws his 4th touchdown on Sunday, people are going to come at me on Twitter, but again, we can't play scared. We kind of have to play with the best process. And I think the best process is being lower on that game, higher on several others. We'll see how it plays out. Weather for this week, there are 6 games with some wind to monitor. There are no games with wind that scares me right now, but I would check back on the wind for the Bills and Steelers, for the Bengals and Vikings, for the Patriots and Dolphins, Broncos, Giants, Chiefs, Browns, Packers, Saints. Again, none of those games are super concerning to me right now from win perspective. 10 to 15, I note, I do not automatically divest. 15 or higher, I get real nervous real fast. We did a trend on wind last year. It ain't great once it gets above 15. So 10 to 15 is okay. It's not ideal, but it's okay. Just keep an eye on those games. Specifically, go to the numberFire games and lineups page on the DFS tab there. Check out the win speed. See what it says. As of right now, no games concerning. Just check back with them once again on Sunday. So let's dive in now to our position by position loves for week number 1. Starting off with quarterback, Brandon. One quick change for this year. We used to do it where we'd only pick, we couldn't overlap in these plays, but that means we're picking 6 running backs, and there are weeks where I don't use a lot of more than 4 running backs. So we're going to tweak it. We can overlap with plays if we both like them. With that in mind, Brandon, who do you like at quarterback this week?
I think the 4 we're going to mention are our top 4.
They're the only 4 I would use right now.
So, but I'm going to start with Patrick Mahomes at 8,800. It's not a bold stance, but we won't always have as much value to get to Mahomes and his stacking candidates like we will in week 1. So I don't want to get too cute and pass up a chance to play Naji Harris and Patrick Mahomes instead of whatever that other 2v2 would look like. Take advantage of these value spots. Mahomes last year was 2nd adjusted expected points per drop back, ranked 4th in expected adjusted completion rate, which is basically your expected completions from next gen stats minus drops. So we don't need a whole lot to say that Mahomes is really good. We know that, but he had 20 plus FanDuel points in 13 of 18 games all the way up through the Super Bowl, 25 or more in 8 of 18, which is the kind of that threshold that we really need for Sunday Million winning lineup potential. So that it doesn't have to be the Sunday Million either, just big potential. We want that 25 points. My second love is going to be Jalen Hurts at a salary of 7,600. He was dead last in that adjusted expected completion rate among qualified quarterbacks last year, but averaged 24 FanDuel points per game over that 4-week stretch that he had, 7th among quarterbacks, ran 11.5 times per game, 68 rushing yards, and faces a Falcons defense that last year was 25th in all 3 of these stats upcoming: passing net expected points per drop back, passing success rate, and opponent adjusted fantasy points per attempt. And according to Pro Football Focus, they are 32nd in secondary rank and 31st in defensive line rank.
Not great.
No,
and I think that does make Hurts interesting. Again, I think that the reason that I might not get there, I'm going to use him at some point. But like, if I were to lop off a fourth person, it'd be Hurts, because I think there's a shot that game goes under. Pretty decent shot. I actually like the under on that game.
Also stacking.
What's that?
Also stacking is a little.
I feel pretty okay stacking with Devontae Smith. But
it's kind of your only option, really.
Yeah, that might not be super smart given that he's like a rookie playing his first game, but like I just like Devontae Smith, so I'm going to do it. I've done plenty of not smart things. That does not bother me at all. My love is Kyler Murray. My two loves are in the same game. So Kyler 1, Ryan Tannehill 2. I just think this game is tremendous for stacking. It's a super high total, 52.5, tight spread at 3 points. I see a path to the Cardinals winning this game. I think I might have bet the money line when I was in Illinois. Should probably check. I don't know. Got a lot of weird stuff going on. I might have. But if we look back to Kyler last year before his shoulder injury, he had at least 23 FanDuel points in every game. But again, floor is stupid. We don't care about floor. But he averaged 30.1. There are a lot of dudes in this slate who will not score 30 points the entire year. That's what Kyler averaged before his shoulder injury. And again, the public tends to underinvest in slight underdog quarterbacks. Kyler is the best, and I will be using him heavily this week. Number 2 is Ryan Tannehill, because he gets me lower salaried exposure to this game. He did have spike games last year. He had 30-plus points twice. He had 25-plus points 6 separate times. It's a high total, tight spread, some running juice. He has Julio Jones this year, which he did not have last year. New OC has like passing tendencies in his past. I would guess that they still skew towards the run more than we'd like, because they've got Derek freaking Henry, and they probably should. But I think there's a chance that they pass more than they did last year, at least. So my top 2, Kyler and Tannehill. Mahomes, though, in the same tier as Tannehill, and very, very likely to get to Jalen Hurts this week, despite the fact he is very clearly number 4 for me. Let's go now to running back. Who you got there?
I'm going to go with Alvin Kamara. I said he was probably my favorite among the top 4, especially factoring in salary for sure. If not, I'd probably be Dalvin. But even when his receiving workload, like we saw his receiving just evaporate last year with Taysom Hill at quarterback, still averaged 26.9 adjusted opportunities per game, which was 5th best at the position. No running back ran a higher percentage of routes than Kamara did in 2020, according to Next Gen Stats. Packers run D is not particularly stout, at least they weren't last year. 30th in adjusted fantasy points per target, which for me actually adjusts on a player level basis. So I like that. And we know there's elite upside for Kamara, multiple paths to having a big game from him. So I like him at the salary. My second love, I'm actually going to stick in that same game and go with Aaron Jones at 7,400. Sounds like I'm just obviously higher on this game than you are, but for Aaron Jones, I haven't really been his biggest supporter, but without Jamal Williams, I think that this actually just benefits him a lot. He might lose some goal line work to A.J. Dillon more than he did with Jamal Williams, but he's not going to lose the receiving work. And he was top 12 in route rate and was 12th in adjusted opportunities per game last year. So kind of feel like he's game script independent or whatever, doesn't matter what the game script is for him.
Viable in all scripts.
Yes. And my third love is going to be Naji Harris at 6,500. I think he's a borderline lock for like a cash game format, just because, I don't want to say like floor, but points per dollar projection. He's probably going to pop just about everywhere.
It's floor, but not at the expense of ceiling. And I think that's the key differentiator.
Yeah, that's a very good, it's not an Adrian Peterson.
So I mentioned that there were 47 backs who made a perfect lineup and only one had no catches. It was him. He's the Danny Amendola of running backs.
That's too good. Buffalo is 23rd in rushing success rate allowed to running backs last year, 29th in adjusted fantasy points per carry. The biggest concern you could say is that they're underdogs, but lots of preseason buzz, and you would expect him to have a big receiving role anyway.
Yeah, I think that Naji is also in mine. He's my number 2 love for this week, just because he is undersalaried relative to both his median projection and his ceiling, because Naji should play every down. Buffalo's rush defense is not the strength of their team. And it seems like they're cool with that, because Buffalo's a really smart team. Like, kudos to their front office. They know what they're doing, which means they don't care about stopping the rush as much. I think that offensive line going to be rough against the pass, but or rough in pass blocking. I think they'll be okay in terms of run blocking, but like you just don't find undisputed number ones at $6,500 very often. So Naji Harris, if you're a PGA podcast listener, you know Brandon and I do a weekly head-to-head called the Bobble Hat. Winner gets a bobblehead, or if I win, I get a bobblehead. If Brandon wins, he gets a hat. We are doing the Bobble Hat for NFL this week. For that kind of format, a head-to-head, I think that Naji Harris, like you said, is a really, really close to a lock. My number one above Naji is Dalvin Cook. I think this game environment is underrated, given that the total just came down to 47.5. I think it should go over. Pretty interesting in the fact that it went down. But Dalvin last year averaged 30 adjusted opportunities per game. Again, that's carries plus 2x targets. 30 is a really big number. That was his average. He had 137 aggregate yards per game between rushing and receiving. That's 13.7 points before you account for catches, before you account for touchdowns. That's awesome. He's facing the Bengals. I would project them to rank 22nd against the rush this year based on my numbers, which are driven by numberFire stuff, but tailored throughout the offseason to account for player movement. So not expecting this rush defense to be that great. Christian Darrisaw practice this week. I don't think he'll play just because he missed so much time, but I still think that offensive line will be good enough for Cook to be solid. And I just think that's a good game stack. So Dalvin 1, Naji 2. Number 3 is directly a pivot off James Robinson. And I think that James Robinson is a solid play this week. He's someone I will use because I do expect passing game work. I do expect the Jaguars to score points. I don't expect that game to be super competitive and high scoring, which is why I think that Chase Edmonds is a pretty good tournament pivot. In the preseason, Kyler Murray played 9 snaps, and Chase Edmonds played 7 of those 9 snaps with Kyler, according to Adam Levitan of Established the Run. We know Edmonds will get passing game work, and it seems like he will get early down work too. So we know he's not going to get the goal line work. I can almost guarantee you that will go to a combination of Kyler and James Conner, but the yardage will be good. And that matters a lot at $5,900. And there's always a chance he has that Austin Eckler role where he's in there at the 7-yard line. You can score from there. So I think that Edmonds, although he is flawed, I think he's still a worthwhile tournament target for this week and a game that I adore. Brandon, I do want to ask you, will you use Chase Edmonds or am I on an island with this one?
I think the odds he completely erupts are low enough where I'm going to take a little bit of a wait and see approach. That could come back to haunt me, but I don't know what the goal line work is going to be. And that's something that I don't have to worry about for some other guys.
Where are you at on James Robinson, the guy I'm using as a pivot off of, or using Edmonds as a pivot off of?
I like him more just because I would assume that...
Well, more than Edmonds, I think is fair. Most people will, though. That's kind of the point, but yeah.
Well, what are you asking me then?
No, I'm asking you general thoughts on him, independent of Edmonds.
I think you could probably consider him as a close to a lock. His role was amazing when he was last year, tied for 6th in adjusted opportunities per game, played about 70% of the snaps. I think that I would probably not play him in a single entry due to expected popularity, but also just not loving that game so much, even though I'm wearing my Texans.
That's what I was going to say. I think that if I have a single lineup, I'm okay glossing over him. I think that he'll be a pretty quick click for a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's fun to say. And I'm okay. I think that I would rather for single entry, I gloss over him and go with Edmonds and Harris, CEH and Harris, something like that. Still getting the value options, taking advantage of that, but using other guys in better game environments.
But cash games, different than single entry, would you play Robinson?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay, let's move to wide receiver. Who do you have there?
I have... I lost my street. Calvin Ridley. I count the top 8 receivers this week I couldn't really decide, so I just went with Calvin Ridley for the fact that I have him projected for the most targets this week and also the most air yards for the week. And air yards are a huge part of the standard deviations I run that kind of find upside. So really easy to justify Calvin Ridley for me. 10.3 targets per game without Julio, or in games where Julio was very limited. Just 0.3 touchdowns per game, which was the real reason that his Fantasy points per game in that split looked worse. We know Matt Ryan typically struggles a lot without Julio, but full offseason here, adding Kyle Pitts, I'm a little bit more optimistic than I was initially once they lost Julio. Just an amazing workload for Ridley last year without Julio. My second love is Tyler Lockett in a game we didn't really talk about. I would consider Julio here, especially if AJ Brown's out, but Lockett along with DK Metcalf, we know, just combined for 47% of Seattle's targets last season. Lockett himself fell off really hard. Still had a strong ADOT, about receiver average, but ran 95% of routes, above average in yards per route run. And Pro Football Focus ranks him with one of the best composite cornerback matchups for the opener. So I think he could go a little bit under the radar, and we do know that Lockett has slate changing upside. My third love is going to be Marquez Callaway, a little bit more of a cash game kind of assumption here at 5,200. I think that's too low for a receiver who, like, I'm trying to limit my exposure to receiver threes. He's basically just a receiver one at a wide receiver three salary. Packers do have a good secondary, but overall, even if we're a little bit bearish on the game itself, still a high total, still a tight-ish spread. And Jameis Winston targeted Callaway 5 times in the preseason, and they connected for 102 yards and 2 touchdowns. So one of the few receivers I feel good about with saving salary.
Yep, I think that Callaway is solid and be very popular, but like that's justified. I wouldn't be shocked if I wind up underweight. But like that's not because I actively want to be underweight, just because in general, popular wide receivers are more likely to bust. So I'm going to definitely be there, but I'm okay being a bit underweight. You mentioned Tyler Lockett. My first love is DK Metcalf because we had not talked about that game, but it fits the process. It checks the boxes. 3 points spread, 50-point total. That total has increased recently, so that's a good thing as well. The Seahawks are expected to play faster this year, which is a good thing in general, and they want the ball out faster. So I think that there is potential for that to be a negative for Metcalf. It lowers his ability to get downfield targets, but he's so good he could score anyway. So for right now, I'm okay keeping things pretty good with him. I do love Lockett too. I think Lockett's a really solid play. I think the one downside of Lockett and Metcalf is there's not a super logical bring back option. Like you could go Jonathan Taylor, you could go with Michael Pittman.
Don't get me started on the Colts market shares yet.
Yeah. You could go with Michael Pittman. And I will have some Michael Pittman just because there's no T.Y. Hilton, which does boost his projected target share. Yeah. But it's not the easiest game to stack. That's the one downside with those guys. I also love Justin Jefferson. Did not mention him in the other sections, but he's a freak. Really excited to use him in that game. My second love is Odell Beckham. He is by far my favorite bring back piece for Chiefs stacks, which I will have plenty of for this week. And apparently Odell's looked pretty good in camp. That's it's not I'm going to use him because of that, but it doesn't hurt coming off an ACL. The Chiefs' strength, I wouldn't say, is at corner on their defense. Odell's $6,500. The Browns can sometimes be a bit more run heavy than you like. It's not as bad as perception, I don't think. But in a game where they're now 5.5-point dogs, I'd expect them to throw plenty. So Odell, my favorite bring back there. Another game I want to stack is Bengals Vikings. So my number 3 love is T. Higgins. I like this game a lot. And yeah, they did add Jamar Chase, which you alluded to, but maybe the drops issues buy Higgins some more time early. Maybe we see Chase split a couple snaps with Auden Tate. That could help him. The Vikings have tried to add a corner. Still not a strength. They've got, I'm not worried about Patrick Peterson against T. Higgins in the year of our Lord 2021. Still okay with that. So I think that Higgins, $6,000, good option. I will say that some lower salary guys who were at least in consideration for me, Corey Davis, Elijah Moore, if I decide to go at that game, Devontae Smith, Nicole Hardman, mostly for game stacks, Marquez Callaway you mentioned. Marquez Valdes-Scantling is actually semi-viable, I would say. And finally, Terrace Marshall, that secondary for the Jets is going to be hideous. It's, oh my gosh, bad. So I could see myself going to Terrace Marshall to save some salary. There are guys I like down there, and of the positions, far and away the position I'll differentiate at most this week is wide receiver, because I am firm committed to quarterback, firm committed to a couple running backs. Wide receiver, I'm okay differentiating a bit more. Same for you?
Yeah, I mean, we know that there's a wide range of outcomes at receiver. It's a little bit more predictable at quarterback and running back. What's not quite so predictable is also tight end.
So let's go to tight end. Feel great about everything here. What are you seeing?
We're not going to talk Travis Kelce in this, but obviously I think it's just assumed that we love him if we can
Yeah.
build around him. But I'm probably not going to get there as much. But with my Mahomes stacks, obviously I'm going to be there plenty. But I like Kyle Pitts. He's my number one here for this section. 6,000. We will learn right away how involved he is. Rookie tight ends historically get off to slow starts, but he's basically a receiver, just listed as a tight end. Philadelphia was 24th against tight ends last year in adjusted fantasy points per target. Pitts played 2 snaps in the preseason that I found, one of which was a 27-yard designed reception, got out in space, looked really good after the catch. There's just a chance that we won't see him at 6,000 again this year. Hope he could just.
Were you grinding film?
Well,
are you just abusing this next gen stats access?
So I was looking at what he did.
I almost choked in my coffee.
Well, it's pretty phenomenal. I'll have to show you some stuff that I found. But
you showed me. I'm gonna use it. I just didn't expect to hear that as I was taking my coffee.
Well, I wanted to double check because that he had only 2 snaps because I'm not grinder, believe it or not. So I just wanted to check. And I just saw that they got him the ball in space and he just kind of ran down the field and looked really good. So I like that. So I'm going to play him
all right
at 6,000, especially because I like that game a good bit. My second love, and I think things get wary below the top 3 this week. So Pitts, Kittle, and Kelce. So we're taking some stabs here. But Jonnu Smith, 4,900. Was brought into the Patriots before Hunter Henry. I think Henry actually has a higher salary this week. He's like 5,400 or something. I could be wrong on that, but it's kind of strange. He played 20 preseason snaps according to Pro Football Focus. Ran 11 routes, which is pretty solid. But he lined up in the slot or out wide on 7 of those 20 snaps, despite seeing just 2 overall targets. His lone catch did lead to some run after the catch as well. And Mac Jones looked good in the preseason, which is obviously why he's starting. But if you look at who he actually threw to, it wasn't really any of the first string. So I think that this is kind of lining up well for Jonnu Smith if they're going to play him out wide a good bit.
And the salaries here are based on Cam starting. You expect a run-heavy approach for New England. This might not be as much of that. So Johnny works just lower on the game environment. And also, they're not going to win that game. Go Dolphins, baby. My first love is George Kittle. He's $7,000, and that's a lot. But also, I like George Kittle a lot. But this game obviously doesn't fit the stack high-scoring games. I will say, though, that mostly because of the 49ers, this game does grade out kind of well from an overall aggregate offensive efficiency perspective. The 49ers are actually my top projected offense from an efficiency perspective for this week, in large part because the Lions. But Kittle, I feel like the matchup with these Lions linebackers, that could be a nightmare for them. $7,000. I'm not going to use Ayuk or Samuel. I will use Kittle. I think that he is kind of the one guy here outside of maybe Trey Sermon. I'm not totally convinced I'll use Sermon yet, but I'm going to use Kittle. I think that he's the best route for access to this game, potentially the only route for getting there. My second love is Tyler Conklin because he weirdly had a good roll down the stretch last year. He had a 15% target share in 4 games without Kyle Rudolph down the stretch, and those were with Irv Smith in the lineup. Now there's no Irv Smith. The second guy is Chris Hurden, who just joined the team, and he's also Chris Herndon. Conklin, $4,400 in a great game. The targets he got last year were not high leverage, but he's a good athlete, and I think that means he could get high leverage targets. So $4,400 in a game I like. I think that's pretty enticing. We also have Dan Arnold at $4,500. I'm going to have some Arnold for sure as well. So again, I'm more willing to use lesser game environments at tight end than at other spots. So Kittle and Conklin, I mean Kittle and Arnold fit that. Conklin's just a good game that I do want to stack. Defense, what you got there?
I'm gonna go Denver, 4,100. They have the 10th ranked defensive line, top secondary according to Pro Football Focus. The Giants were not healthy all preseason. As you mentioned, Kenny Golladay doesn't even expect them to start off pretty well. There's not a whole lot of reps there. And Daniel Jones had a 9.1% sack rate last year, a top 5 rate at the position.
Danny Dimes, Danny Sacks. Maybe that's a more appropriate nickname. It's kind of a weird nickname.
Sack of Dimes.
Sacky Dimes.
Sack, like a sack of, I don't know,
I'm going to abandon ship on this. I think the Broncos are the top defense too. $4,100 against what seems to be a potentially dysfunctional offense. The Giants offense it's not healthy. I think that's a big part of it. I'm not a big Daniel Jones guy. If you're looking for some options that are a bit lower salary than $4,100, I think the Falcons work there facing the Eagles. Again, I think it's not going to be the best game in terms of defense because the Eagles are probably going to run quite a bit, which I'd rather have a lot more pass attempts. So the Falcons are fine, but they're favored. They're at home. Defense, I think, is underrated a bit. And they also have Dean Pease now as their defensive coordinator. He does some exotic stuff. So that can be fun. I like the Giants in the same game. Teddy doesn't make a lot of mistakes, but it's just a good defense. They are at home. I think that could be fine. They're not the highest upside option, but I don't mind them. I like the Bills facing the Steelers. The Steelers, at least historically, have been a team that passes a lot. I don't expect that to be as true this year. And Ben also does get the ball out pretty fast, but it's still a bad offensive line. The Bills have some playmakers in their secondary. That's a good thing. And finally, the Chiefs. I love Baker, huge Baker guy, but we're probably going to see some desperation Baker, and desperation Baker is not thriving Baker. So I think the Chiefs are in play, at least as a lower salaried option. But I think the Broncos are number one. Other options right by the Broncos.
While you're looking, if anyone's curious why we would target defenses in games with high totals, about 60% of FanDuel points come from sacks and interceptions. Sacks obviously come from throwing the ball and having high volume. So you don't want to just look at points allowed and play defenses like that.
You want to maximize dropbacks, which is why I said I was lower on the Falcons. I still will use them, but you want to maximize dropbacks because it's very hard to score points in rush attempts. Sacks, interceptions, those things come from dropbacks. So that's why I would skew that way. And you're correct in pointing that out because it is a new year. That is all that we have here for week number 1 on this preview podcast. Once again, we'll be back with you on Monday, 9 a.m. Eastern, to wrap things up, give you our thoughts, give you the big winners and losers, revamped preview or recap podcast this year to give you the top line takeaways right away and let you know what we saw in Thursdays and Sundays action. Make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a rating and review. The recap podcast will also be live on YouTube at 9 a.m. on Monday. We're going to have a preview of the Bucks and Cowboys today, 4 p.m. on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages. I'll be there 4 to 4:30 to talk single game DFS, talk some props, talk about why I'm banging my head against the wall with Cowboys plus 8.5. What could go wrong there? That'll be 4 to 4:30. And then tomorrow we have our snake draft. Snake draft season is back with myself, Brandon, and JJ Zachariason doing a live snake draft on air and then taking some of your questions. Brandon, before we close up here for today, any final thoughts, any final words of encouragement for people listening out there before they head off to fill out week 1 lineups?
Encouragement, good luck. You can do this. Final thoughts. We covered a lot of strategy-based stuff. I know it can be a lot to take in, but I would say honestly, if you're the type of person who wants to play even let's say 20 lineups, just try not to get sprinkles of everyone. I think you want to kind of start paring down your player pool, even starting in week 1.
That's what I was going to say is don't let fear drive your decisions. You're going to miss out on guys. It's going to happen. Yeah. That's fine. I know it's going to happen this week. I know it's going to be guys I said don't use this week who are going to blow up and I'm going to get tweets for it. That's fine.
It's also going to be the guys who were like, I want to play this guy, but I need to cut him out and he hits. And it's going to happen. It's high variance. There's a lot of guys to consider. Yeah, but when you just need to maximize that if that's how you want to play.
Correct. And your process can differ from ours. That's totally okay. This is what we do. This is our process, and we're trying to pass it on to you as well. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, your favorite, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gdula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. Also, make sure you follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to everyone for tuning in for today. We made it to week 1. Games are coming hot and fast. Go win yourself some cash. We'll talk to you once again on Monday to wrap it all up. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire.